Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, living beneficiaries, to the show for living beneficiaries, the House of Hidalgo show on the Estate Radio Network. Prepare for the most educational 60 minutes on all of radio with your host, Rick Hidalgo. The House of Hidalgo show can be followed on Twitter and Facebook by searching House of Hidalgo. Find the show on the web at www.therockofsalem.org. Sign up for the newsletter, and while you're there, take the 5-question survey to let us know what you think. The State Radio Network is part of the Blog Talk Radio family of networks and can be found at www.blogtalkradio.com/South Dakota DP. Join the show now by chat or call 619-639-4605. Don't forget to dial 1 to get in the queue. Here's your host, Rick Hidalgo! Hello, everybody. This is another session of the House of Hidalgo. Today is June the 19th, 2013, and we've got another glorious day on our hands. Tonight we've got a very special evening. Once again, we've outdone ourselves. We're bringing Mr. Ken Hunt back on tonight. He's going to talk about what's really close to his heart, and that is the mortgage situation. He's got some things to teach us and advise us on, to give us a head start on bringing forth a remedy in that area. And I just want to put out a quick word. I just got off listening to Mr. Stephen. Boy, how did it slip my mind here? I just got through listening to Stephen's show over on Cancel the Cabal, and Stephen Roberts has been talking with a guy tonight concerning mortgages as well, but his is a little bit more on the legal side. It wasn't really up the alley that we choose to go. But without any further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest, who is Ken Hunt. Again, he came on last week this time, talking about the sovereignty issue in Hawaii. And tonight he, of course, is going to discuss mortgages, which that's very close to his heart. So without any further ado, Ken Hunt, thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure. I've been.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was just going to say I appreciate you coming on and being part of this show. There's a lot of people out there struggling, especially in the area of mortgage, where they think they're stuck in something that's impossible to get out of. And I'm glad you came on tonight to straighten that out for us.
Well, I've been studying it and been involved in it since 2001. And along the way, I've learned a few things. And I can say this, that there are many things out there that will work, but in general, do not trust anyone to do it for you. You've got to do your homework.
Right.
If you choose not to do your homework, then you might want to use the services of anyone that will only charge you, or at least give you that alternative, will only charge you if they're successful. And that cuts out a lot of charlatans that, in my opinion, have half solutions. And the biggest motivation seems to be to take your last $2, $3, $4, $5, $10,000.
Yes.
I know that's a bit harsh.
Well, that's true,
that's
though.
what I've seen over the years that I've been involved in this.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That's what they do. They're, a better word for them might be pirates. They come along and they arrest your ship, and they take everything that they have that you have that's of any value to you, and then at the end of the day, you've got you got a lighter pocketbook and no home either to live in. So I appreciate what you're going to teach us tonight. What got you started in the whole mortgage fiasco anyhow?
Well, in 2001, I owned about 27 properties, and thought that I knew something about real estate. Been in it for about 30 years at that time, I started watching my small empire of properties dissolve, and I couldn't quite figure out some of the games that were being played. And I had a buddy called me up, and he says, what if you found out that you never got a mortgage? And, of course, I've been in real estate, as I said, for 30 years, so my first response was, well, that would be ridiculous. That's the whole basis, you know. And so he says, well, are you willing to start learning? And, yeah, I started learning, and the more I looked into it, the more I realized that what he was saying was exactly true. And the sad reality is nothing's really changed. There's a lot more smoke and mirrors out there, but you still never got a mortgage. At least 90% of the times you never got a mortgage. The 10% of the times you might have, and that's why it's important that as part of your homework, you do want to pull a security audit. You don't want to waste your time on a forensic audit. That by itself will do nothing. Security audit might actually prove that there is no standing in the matter. And once you pull that, if you are that 90%, well, then you've got to take it to the next stage as well. And you can do that through a so-called administrative process, which in my opinion by itself does not work, does not complete the process, but it does put on the record the kind of information you need to do to use the courts to your advantage if that's the way you're going to go.
Now, Ken, you mentioned doing a security audit. Can you, for purposes of clarity to people who may not understand the game at all, can you tell us what exactly a security audit does and what it's for?
Well, security audit basically will tell you when you allegedly got that loan, who you got it from, how you got it, and then more importantly, the road it took since the time that you supposedly got that loan, how it was securitized, how it was split off from being the note and the mortgage or deed of trust, depending on what state you're in. There's different names, but how they divided the instrument up. And with that information, you have a real strong argument, if you know how to present it, to sit there and file a quiet title action on your property. And without going to the quiet title route, you're basically going to spin your wheels. At least is what I've come to the conclusion. People say, well, I won. I said, what do you mean? They said, you get the case dismissed? And they go and say, well, yeah, it got dismissed. And I say, well, how was it dismissed? And in most cases, almost all the time, it's dismissed where they have the right to go back into court again. So you're just buying yourself some time, which does work provided you do something else besides just wait till the next round, which will come.
Right. Right. So so once in your study, once you've done a security audit, you said the next step then is to proceed in the procedure to put in a quiet title. You need to be able to have someone that can defend that audit, and there's a lot of companies that will do security audits out there. But in most cases, getting them to go to court, should it be necessary, is not the easy task. And, you know, I could sit there and say I have authority on anything, but if the court's not going to recognize it or if I'm not going to go to court, then it does not matter. This happens all the time in court when the attorney gets up and claims that they have knowledge of a matter when, in fact, they were never at the closing. They don't have any proof of anything, but they speak as if they are a witness in fact. And you have to object to those kind of things. But what I've learned is that the courts understand quiet title actions. You don't have to educate a judge what a quiet title action is. When you go in there and you try to say, well, I never got a mortgage, even if the judge knows that to be true, which in most cases they don't at the lower level, it's just too preposterous for them to accept the fact that they're going to give you your house free and clear,
which of course is not even accurate. You're not getting your house free and clear. If anything, you're not even getting the damages that you've incurred.
Right. Right. And I totally understand. And you're operating from a premise that within the first 72-hour window of when you signed your name to that promissory note, that money was printed to pay off that debt. Is that the premise you're operating
I'm
from?
actually operating on the premise of what Vince Kahn says, and I tend to think Vince has got it accurate. He has a 111-page manual that he used to give out for free. I have copies of that. If anybody really wants to do their homework, they're welcome to request it from me, and I'll be glad to send it to them. But I'm working on the basis that when you actually went and applied for your loan, okay, that's when you gave the authorization to start printing that money, as you call it. And typically about 2 to 3 weeks before closing, you get your letter that states that you have been approved. And that's, the pre-approval don't mean anything. But once you've been approved, as I understand it and believe it, that's when the alleged lender actually gets the money. And now what they do with the money is they put that in their account, and some could say their secret account, which then creates the monies available that theoretically they're loaning to you. But that's why when you go in and you're going to demand discovery and you want to go this route, you've got to request for the complete accounting records to show how those funds came into that alleged lender's account and how they went out.
Right.
And that's a tricky road to go. More often than not, the court is not going to accept that line of discovery, and they're going to say that's proprietary. But there has been some recent cases where courts have said, yes, it seems reasonable request to know where the money came from. I know you know, Rick, and probably most of the audience knows that a Federal Reserve Bank cannot loan money. It can only make money. It's against the federal law to loan credit. So you get into these crazy questions, say, well, what did you get loaned? And the reality is you got loaned nothing. But that does not mean that a mortgage was not created, and that's the part that a lot of people don't get. You actually have allowed that lender to create a mortgage because you come to them at the closing, you sign documents, and you basically state that you own the property free and clear, and then you give them the right to put a lien on the property. And that's why if you knew what you were doing at closing, you would demand those papers to take with you. You have 3 days to rescind them, and all you do is you don't come back again with the papers. There's no reason to sign anything. You own the property. Now, getting that title again still gets a little tricky, but I tell people if they're going to go ahead and get a mortgage, try that route. But they got to know that they've got to demand all the papers when they're at the closing, exercise their right that they have 3 days to look over all the papers. What the alleged lender tries to do through their attorney is say, well, you have 3 days to rescind. Well, you know as well as I do that when people leave a closing, they never look at the paperwork again.
Right. So what kind of paperwork is it that you're looking for at that closing? Because I know when I went to a closing table, the paperwork, at least that they set before me, was not much more than just the promissory note itself.
That is correct. What you want to look at is that typically in your mortgage, about Section 9, you'll read a thing that says that buyer or borrower covenants that they have legally seized the property. And you can't legally seize something unless it's free and clear. That's in the documents before you sign them. So if it's free and clear, why would you encumber your property?
Yeah.
You know, the catch-22 about this is that you still have to, because you don't have the keys to the property, because if theoretically the keys are given to you at closing, okay?
Right.
And the time the keys should have been given to you is when you had your loan approval. That's when they've gotten the money. They borrow at that time, depending on who you talk to, they get 2 to 4 times the amount of the loan.
Right.
And then they loan you out of the 2 to 4 times that they get. They loan you, in essence, the mortgage that they created. That you've agreed now to pay them back, even though you've authorized them to take the money out of your back pocket and treat it as a loan.
Right. So are they?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering, from the banker's perspective, are they justifying getting 2 to 4 times what the loan requires on fractional reserve banking? Is that how they're justifying it?
Yeah, that's how they justify it.
Sure.
If anyone studies the charter of any of the Federal Reserve banks, they cannot loan money. They're not allowed to. It's against the charter. What happened is that we've always had this fraud in mortgages ever since the 1911 Act, when we created the Federal Reserve System. And I may be wrong on the date. I always get those dates wrong.
Yeah, it's 1913.
Yeah, 1913. And the reality is, of course, we all know that we mortgaged our soul without our knowledge. But this is how money has been done ever since the beginning of time. What happened, though, is that the public became aware of just how deep this fraud was when we decided to go even another layer, and that was to pretend that we got the money from selling it to Wall Street, when all they were doing selling to Wall Street was equitable rights to a title. I have documents that shows where, if the borrower would read the papers, it says, you understand that the promissory note is being converted. And converted is a nice word of saying that the note is being tore up. You cannot have a note as a security. Securities are not notes. So notes gets transferred into security. When they do that, there is no note. And we realize that you can't separate a note from the mortgage instrument, but that's what they did in this latter stages when we got into the so-called MERS situation. But the fraud of mortgages has been happening way before the crisis that we are enduring right now. And
sure.
my approach to this thing is a little differently, because, sure, if somebody wants to become very educated and wants to learn how they got screwed over, that's fine, but it still does not complete the process. And in general, the public is losing out in court. And that's why we've gone the route of saying that, well, hang and beat the bank at their own game. And there are ways to do that.
Right. I have to ask you this question only because I'm involved with a group right now that is rebutting certain presumptions that are being set out in law. And one of those presumptions is that we are the trustees when actually we're the living beneficiary. And
that's right.
And I was just curious, based on your knowledge, Ken, is that part of the deception too? Are they treating us like a trustee in this mortgage fraud?
Depending on how you look at the documents, I would say the answer is yes. Okay? The whole assumption is that nowhere do they treat us like we are the party that actually created the so-called loan. The reality is we borrowed it from ourselves.
Right.
And they're allowed, because they know how to capitalize into the system, they're allowed to receive a fee. Could you imagine, like, I have a joke about a bank I want to open up, and it'll be part of the Federal Reserve. And what it'll state is, come in and borrow $400,000, and we will give you $800,000. Okay? And the reason I would run this ad is because it would maybe wake people up and say, well, how can you do that? And I said, well, it's real simple. I can do it because I can still leverage this loan. If I do it in such a way, I can ensure that the loan never goes bad. Now, if I can ensure the loan never goes bad, then I can do my 9-to-1 or 10-to-1 fractionalizing accounting. 9-to-1 because you have to have a 10% reserve. So how would I do that? Very simple. You make your payment and at the end of the loan payoff, or if you sell off the note or whatever, okay, I will give you the $400,000 that's been set aside in the account. Now, if you do not do that, I will guarantee you for 12 years you don't have to make a payment on that house, because we'll guarantee that the $400,000 that we set aside that draws a small amount of interest will make the monthly payment for you. Typical home ownership is about 7 to 8 years in America. Well, if you run the thing, I think you'll find that if you take $400,000 and you're borrowing a $400,000 note, your payoff balance is about $900,000, which means you can pay about 12 years of principal or interest before you be into that level of having a non-payment available. Now, the only reason I want to do that is just so that people would wake up and realize, well, how could I do that? Because they still leverage 8 times that amount. And I'm not against the profit. I'm against the non-disclosure of that profit. I'm also against the fact that when I know you're a bad risk and I buy insurance and I'm betting that you're going to default and I get 175% return on the defaultment, then why was I not made aware of that? Because I was a party to that action. I'm entitled to the difference between the so-called loan and the 75% profit.
Right. Well, and I think that's what most of us are objecting to, is that they're breaking laws of contract by not fully disclosing what it is that the terms and conditions are. I know that they could say all day long that it's in those papers, but to me, it wasn't fully disclosed.
No, it's not. It's not. The problem is that if you read the various major rulings, a lot of times people go into court and they go in with unclean hands, even though they don't realize that their hands are not clean. For example, if you do the administrative process, you make an assumption that if there's a non-response, that they're agreeing to the following things. Now, if you do that and you stop making your payment, courts have ruled that you're going in there with unclean hands. So if you're going to go this way, make sure you keep on paying your payment. I have people say, well, do I have to keep on making a payment? I say, well, not necessarily, but you lose a lot of your power in court if you're going to use conventional court. What I've come to the conclusion is this is our current strategy that we think makes the most sense, okay? We have money sitting in an escrow account with an attorney, and we simply have the homeowner first. We pull the security audit. We know exactly what the heck we have, and then we start the process where we ask for a payoff letter, and we then simply state clearly we have the money set aside, verified by our attorney, to pay off this debt. Now, if you have actual funds, not a note or not a promissory note or not a bond or any of those things, you can demand and force the issue that the bank produce the documents we all talk about and saying, well, they have a right, they have to produce the note and all this kind of stuff. They actually don't have to do it unless you have bona fide funds set aside. That's what I've learned. Okay?
Wow.
So we've solved that problem, we think. Okay? I'm waiting because I won't go this route myself unless I can offer to the consumer under our strategy it doesn't cost them a penny to try it. That means we cover all the costs, we cover all the risks. If it doesn't work, they're no worse off than what they are. Plus, the laws have got so tough that it's actually tougher on the people that are trying to help the consumer. I have friends that are not bad people, in my opinion, but they're being attacked by the state because they're trying to help homeowners. Why? Because they're charging a fee. And I don't consider that what they're charging to be unfair or unreasonable, and I actually think they have some idea of what they're doing. But nonetheless, that's the way the state is taking, or that's the approach the state is taking these days, or most states are taking. Go after the people that are trying to help the homeowners. And that even includes some of these well-known defense attorneys. The state's going after them because they claim that they're doing bogus law. And sure, it's because of the pressure being put down by the banks, back on the corporations of the courts. And, of course, the corporations of courts are heavily invested in the bank corporations. So one hand's washing the other for the most part. So we think, gee, if you, on your loan, for example, they tell you have $312,000 owed on your loan, and we have a letter come from our attorney after we've done our security audit and we know they don't have the instruments that they claim they have because they've securitized, but we offer to pay it off, they've got to produce the instruments. If they don't, now we have the basis of our quick title or our quiet title action. And if that doesn't work, well, then we can basically prove that the bank did not deal fairly with the IRS when they set up the system and they didn't pay the taxes on it. And that's ultimately is why the banks come to the table, because they might tell the courts to go to hell, but in my experience, they don't tell the IRS to go to hell. That's kind of the strategy we're using, and we're going to get serious about it. We have an investment that we've been involved in that, like everything else, has not materialized quite on the time schedule that we expected. But once that's in place, yes, we're going to basically say, folks, here's our terms and conditions. This is what we charge. Doesn't cost you a penny. And no, you don't have to be an expert at it. And no, you don't have to dot all your T's and I's, because we will. We think that will work. From what we've tested, we believe that will work.
That is absolutely amazing, and the fact that your passion is to do something this incredible is it really speaks volumes about your character, Ken Hunt. So I just getting back to the mortgage thing, I guess I'm just not sure what route. Until all that is set up, who do you go to for these security audits? Do you use any particular security audit?
I've got a couple of groups. One group that I've never used, but I'm exploring right now, and I am because it fits into what I think is my evolving strategy, okay? And what this group does, it charges about twice as much as the going rate for a security audit. And I qualify that because you'll find some company says, oh, yeah, we'll do a security audit for $1,200. And I said, well, that sounds great. And then they said, but we have to do a forensic audit first. And so they're back up at $2,500 again, okay? And that don't mean squat. But I've got one lady that I've looked at her audits, and if people know what to do with the audits, I believe that she's got a good audit. I also know that she will agree to go to court, and yes, that's an add-on fee, but that's a very important part of it. But here's where the catch-22 comes in again. Who's going to defend you in court? Most people can't not defend themselves in court. Under our strategy, whether we use an attorney or not, because I'm quite comfortable in court, is that I can put the property into depending on what state you're in, into a land trust or into a corporation, and yes, as a partial owner of that land trust or that corporation, I can defend myself in a court of law, my interests as well as your interests.
Right, sure.
And yes, there are some people that can defend themselves in court, but most can't.
You would simply make yourself a trustee within that trust or that corporation in order to be able to defend your beneficiary.
Yeah, exactly. It's a no-brainer how you do it. And the problem is, I tell people, well, if you have an attorney to know what the hell they're doing, then by all means use them. But quite honestly, if you do, tell me who they are. I know some sharp attorneys around the country that I think almost get it. And I won't, anybody that wants more information, I'll be glad to give out those attorneys' names. And I have a little, I won't say a manual. It was given to me by an attorney that I have respect for by the name of Garfield. And he has a thing saying, how to interview your attorney. Because if you're going to hire an attorney to defend this in a court of law, man alive, he better know more about it than I do.
Right.
If he doesn't, then there's some question as to why you want to use him. And I've had, debates with attorneys who people say, well, I want you to talk to my attorney. I said, hey, no problem. I said, he'll charge you $300 to $400 an hour to talk to me, and I won't charge a penny to ask him if he knows anything.
Yeah.
And in most cases, they don't. And it's not necessarily that makes them bad. They just have not been exposed to it. And in most cases, they're working for the banks, directly or indirectly. They tell people to go file bankruptcy. Worst advice you can give, in my opinion, unless you have a way to use that bankruptcy to your advantage. And yes, there are ways to do that. But I've watched all these techniques over the years, and I've tried some, and we've been successful at some. And everything that I now believe is culminated from all these things that we do know. And it's an evolving field because, yes, the banks are getting smarter, and they're spending more money on litigation.
Right.
Well,
starts
are up, I guess, year to date. I was reading Realty Track. Starts for beginning foreclosures are up 11% comparing May of this year to May of last year. And where I live, which is Hawaii, it's up 112% comparing last May to this May. Now, partly because the economy is coming back, maybe, inventory is dropping, big bank companies are now buying up lots and lots and hundreds and thousands of properties for a song and put them out into rental. So now the banks are highly motivated to take your house. People say, well, that's been 3 years and I have not made a payment. I said, well, guess what? You will be making a payment or you'll be out of your house in the next 6 months in most cases now. So it's time to get busy if you're going to do something.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, Ken, I do have another area that I wanted to bring up to you here in this mortgage issue, but we're going to take a quick little break and run a little sponsor spot here. It's about 2 minutes long, so if you want to get yourself a drink of water, we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
No problem.
Do you have hopes, dreams, and goals, but don't know how to reach them? Do you wonder how you could do differently to achieve greater success at home or at work? Do you feel like something is holding you back from enjoying your life to the fullest? Are you fed up with status quo and ready for real and lasting life change? Are you wanting to start a business or expand an existing one? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then you are ready for life coaching with Mr. Attitude. Mr. Attitude will stretch and grow you and take your life to a whole new level of success by equipping you with the tools to help you to accomplish more in less time, get and keep your priorities in line, gain greater happiness and joy, face your fears, plan for success, be more assertive and confident, overcome negative stress, deal with negative thinking, set goals you will achieve, and more. Mr. Attitude specializes in results producing. Life strategy coaching for the personal side of your life. Small business coaching for those who want to start a small business or build a stronger small business. Train the trainer coaching for those who aspire to become a motivational professional speaker. Call today and reserve your appointment with greater success. 605-450-1955. That's 605-450-1955. Or email Bob at MrAttitudespeaks.com. That's MrAttitudespeaks.com. Mr. Attitude is committed to your success. All right, we're back on the House of Hidalgo show. This is your host, Rick Hidalgo, and today we are on with Ken Hunt, and he is a passionate person about the issue of mortgage, and he wants to help as many people as he can with their mortgage situations. We discussed in the first half of our show about security audits and quiet title action, and these are things that that Ken is very passionate about. And I wanted to kind of redirect this a little bit, because Ken, we know, especially we who have been in the Patriot community for some time, we know that it's very difficult to get remedy or justice inside of a court. Have you had any situation or any good fortune with being able to settle these things outside of a court?
We've had results settling when we bring up the issues the way that we've learned it. And I said it's not a large enough results to where I want to talk about, but let me explain again the process that we're doing now. And that is that when we pull that security audit, we know what we're up against. We know if we're at 90% or not. Then we contact the lender directly, and we make it very clear our findings after we know exactly what the payoff of that loan is, okay? And we put in that letter to them, we put a copy of our attorney's escrow showing, setting aside in our attorney's escrow account that amount of money, and simply waiting for them to meet the conditions of the agreement as spelled out in the paperwork that was signed. We give them a very short window of time to deal with it. We make it very clear what our actions are going to be, and yes, our actions are stated very much. It's going to be quiet title action. You go to court where you have proof of payment waiting to be paid in a manner that the court will recognize on an attorney's stationery with proof that the money is sitting in escrow, demanding what the contract says you have a right to do, and we have seen on the small scales that it usually never goes to court. The bank is motivated to deal with you then. Those that don't want to deal with you then understand the fraud that they are committing, and they understand that you are going to take that route. And yes, you would be entitled to triple damages. We think that banks have gotten very smart and realized the best thing to do is to simply walk away from the property. We haven't done that on a large enough scale, but we think that it's not going to change with the strategy we have, because we're playing their game. Before, we never had much to go on. We'd say, well, we had a bond money and all this stuff. Bond money is not the same thing as money sitting in escrow, waiting for the completion. And it seems like the banks understands that on a small scale that we have done it. I think you're wasting your time in court. The only reason you go to court is where you're going to do something that the court understands, such as a quiet title action. And you definitely want to do the quiet title action unless the bank will give you the full discharge of whatever claim they have to the property. In most cases, what happens, even in the administrative, you just don't get a response. So you're up in limbo land till whatever. I've got people still in their houses, to my knowledge, 5 years after the fact, and even after they've been foreclosed on for 2 years. But as I explained to them, do not simply assume the matter is done. If you don't have the discharge, you don't have anything.
Right. Right. So, how I know that you're not at a place where you have this escrow set aside, and you're not at that place where you want to...
We actually have the escrow. We can do up to $1 million. We have the funds in the escrow. What we don't have is that nothing's free, so the cost of the escrow to the investor, cost of the attorney, cost of the audit, and the authorization letter that supports the audit that is used in the quiet title action, those are costs that we don't have the funds set aside to sit there and put that out on risk.
I see.
I actually went into this investment that I went into, me and my partner, with the intent that we knew this would fund what we projected to be our monthly business quota to ensure that everybody who preferred to go the route of no money out of pocket could do so. And that is what we're holding off on. By the end of this month, that may be in place. But it was also supposed to have been done by the beginning of this month. So I'm still holding until that comes into place. But I will tell everyone the same thing. If they want to use the escrow and they have the monies to cover some of these factors, they can use our system. I just did not want to be able to go out there and just tell people, well, give me this amount of money. Because unfortunately there are no free lunches. These things do cost. We like to say, well, folks, how would you like it to come out of the equity that you no longer have? In most cases, people are upside down in their mortgages, at least where I'm at, to the tune of $200,000 or $300,000. And so the house might be worth $100,000 now, but they have a mortgage on it of $400,000. And so the reality is they don't have anything. So we take our take out of that $100,000 because that's the only real value of the property. It's what it can sell for very quickly, and we work our arrangement from that point of view. If we're successful, we make a lot of money. We believe it helps the homeowner move on with their life. It definitely gives them far more money than doing a quick sell, which in most places doesn't give them a penny. And it's a lot better than doing the Trade for Key program, which even at $20,000 in some parts of Florida is pretty minor considering how much you have put at risk in most cases.
Right. So is this, have you basically been working with people just in Hawaii right now? Do you have people nationally, internationally working with you?
We have people in the mainland. We really have not geared up, as I said. We have a property we're moving forward on in Washington, one down in Florida, but we have not really started marketing. We do have a website that we promote, but once again, we have not started marketing in that website, mainly because I don't, in my little area of Hawaii, this is like being in a small town. I'm on an island that maybe has 170,000 people, and pretty much everyone kind of knows what's going on. And unfortunately, people fly into here, and I won't mention any names, and they blow smoke up a lot of people's butts and take a lot of money and don't perform. And I keep trying to say that all that comes back on people like myself that have strived to help people and say, you know what, we've got to be competent enough in our systems to where we can offer them a no-cost, unless successful alternative. Because each time someone comes in and takes $2,000 or $3,000, I usually hear about these people saying, well, I talked to so-and-so, and they took this money, and this person took this money. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry that's what happened, but we're not going to be any different under our current system. And I basically stopped doing that about a year ago. It just was not worth it because we could not guarantee success. There is no way to guarantee success when you're going to court. And there is no way to guarantee success when you do the administrative process. Right. Is what I've learned. And especially if you yourself cannot handle it. And you get people saying, well, I don't want to put my property, into a corporation. I'm like, well, then are you able to defend the action yourself? And most of the times, no, they don't know how to do it. Well, I'll hire an attorney. I said, well, gee, find me an attorney that you want to hire. I'd love to have a good attorney. I know a few in Hawaii that might be good, but pretty much you've got to spend $25,000 to even sit down with them. And if you had $25,000, you probably wouldn't be in foreclosure even.
Exactly.
Reality.
Yeah.
So it's a catch-22 when it comes to that. But no, I'm going to be back on your show if you want me to when we have the program in place. I'll explain what it is. And yes, it'll give people the choice. They can either take the risk, and therefore it's a risk. what it's called. Or they can sit there and let us do it, and yes, it costs them more, but it only costs them if it works. And there's no way to guarantee that it's going to work. There's so many different circumstances. You've heard the old line, if you're in court, who's the best attorney to hire? And the answer is the one sleeping with the judge. So you don't have control of these variables.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And I read, anybody that wants to study this stuff, I can turn them on to a lot of websites that I think will keep them updated and probably overloaded. But you either got to know this stuff, stay abreast of it, or you got to have someone that is on top of it. And it's just constantly changing. And the banks, when someone figures out what works, usually by the time the public hears about it, it's already a dead deal, is what I have learned over the years.
Do you want to...
all you had to do is say, well, gee, produce the note. Well, that doesn't work in court anymore. The judge laughs at you saying, well, yeah, really, we already know that. But you might find you have a little more ammunition if you say, well, you know what, I want the court to seize the note. I want it to be investigated by an FBI agent by this person's name, and I brought the electronic microscope so the judge can look underneath it and see that this note is not a real copy. It has yellow dots on it, and yellow dots means it was copied by some fancy copy machine, but it's still a copy. And I'm sure you probably know that blue ink or original, what's it called, blue dry ink, the reason they use that is because if you take and cut the ink is still wet. That's why they call it, I forgot the term, that's why they call it the wet blue ink copy.
Right.
And you take water, you can still get the ink out of it. Well, now you've got copy machines that will actually create the indentation of blue ink, but it's still not blue ink. But I've learned, some of those things over the years because, you show it to a judge and say, well, here's an electronic microscope. Tell me what you see. And then you have an expert witness about what causes those yellow dots. The problem is you don't usually get a chance to do that in court. Most people lose out in the beginning because as soon as they talk about getting a mortgage, it's over. They've got to argue very clearly there is no standing in these matters. If you read most of these lawsuits that are filed by attorneys, the first thing they admit in their documents is their standing. Well, if you admit their standing, then you're under the laws of the state as it relates to foreclosures. And that's why it's very tough to win those kind of battles. And I think it's a waste of time, as I said. I think it's better off to play the game the judge understands and beat them at their own game. And if you have the money to pay off your mortgage, set it aside with your attorney's escrow account and use the same process, and you'll get the same results. I believe the bank will back down if you've done your security audit and you know for a fact they don't have standing in the matter.
Right. And, I totally agree with you. If you end up going into an administrative court, you've got to prove emphatically that they don't have jurisdiction in the issue, or else you're screwed.
Well, and most people just don't know how to do that. I try to say to people that if you get pulled in for deposition, you need to understand that typically you get brought up into entrapment. But no matter what you say in that deposition, if the last thing that comes out of your mouth, you clarify that no, in case I ever said I got a mortgage, that is not true. I never got a mortgage. They cannot use any part of that deposition that exists before then.
Right.
But people entrap themselves because they do not understand the rules.
Right, and I think
their attorneys teach it to them, and attorneys don't in most cases.
Yeah, you're asking the fox to teach the hens.
Well, that's the whole thing, and someone says, "Well, you mean my attorney doesn't work for me?" I said, "Well, let's put it this way: if there's a conflict between you and the court, no, he does not, or she does not.
Right.
They only work to you until there's a conflict, and you have to understand that. And then if you're going to, represent yourself in a pro se, well, I'm sure you know what the word pro se means. And so you have to really know how to sit there and present yourself into court. Ideally, you can accomplish mostly what you need to do administratively without going to court, and you probably know that. That's where the clerk of court comes in. But you still got to bring it to closure. You still got to complete the process. And I've looked at a lot of administrative processes, and yes, some work, but most of them don't work. Because it's still dependent upon how you're going to enforce it. I love when people say, well, I'll hire the U.S. Marshal to enforce it and collect it. Well, you tell me how many cases you've heard where that's actually worked.
Yeah.
I've heard the Winston trials. I've heard a lot of people talk about how they're going to enforce it, but I've met very few people that's actually had it done.
Right.
So I've come to the conclusion that you're basically spinning your wheels because you do not know how to complete the process.
Well, what's your feeling, Ken, about these, these land patents? Do they have any standing, any significance?
Well, I think they do. They don't work in Hawaii, and probably because this land, was clearly stolen. We won't get into that subject. But we have royal patents, and all of the land of Hawaii was quit-claimed over. So that doesn't work here. Now, as far as the individual states, yeah, I think they do work. But you still have to perfect them. And I haven't seen, I've heard a lot of hot air, but I have not seen any documentation where consistently they have won. And so what that tells me is there's a part of the equation that we're not understanding. For example, I lived in Georgia before I moved to Hawaii, and it blew my mind because I've never bought property anywhere in the United States where, in order to buy the property, I had to waive 3 of my constitutional amendments. And there's actually a document that had to be signed at the closing. And,
really?
Of course, being naive, I asked the attorney, and I knew the attorney's answer. He didn't know crap. He said, it doesn't matter because it wouldn't be enforceable. And I said, well, the point is that it must be there for a reason. And I know why it's there now, but I don't know if it's applicable in other states, but I do know why it's in Georgia. And it still doesn't make sense to me on the surface. But there are no documents in your closing that just happen to be there for filler. They have significance, even though you don't understand maybe the significance of them.
Right. Now, I've also heard, there's a group of Moorish people that have gone into all kinds of different paper trails. One thing that they do is when they sit down at closing, they write a certain UCC code over the top of their signature, and that's supposed to be able to protect them, or from this fraud. What do you say to that?
Well, I follow different Moorish groups, and I kind of know where the Moorish are coming from and the ideal who owned America first. And of course, I kind of laugh about that because to me, unless I talk to God, no one owned anything. But I follow some people on Facebook that I actually have a lot of respect for the gentleman. If I don't bastardize his name, I'm a hotep. But it still comes back that I don't see any proof of the pudding. And when you see some of these people that are talking like they are experts and they hold out they're experts, but then you get into their individual matters and you see what they're still involved in trying to protect and win, they haven't won. So I'd like to know some of the ones that have actually won, not the ones that claims they're winning. I can sit there and write on my driver's license that my signature is not valid because it's subject to UCC 308, formerly 204, if I remember. Okay?
Right.
And yes, I can have a police officer look at that, and some will look at that and not touch me, and others will say, I don't give a crap. And yes, I can sit there and go to court, and I can sit there and tell the judge that I want that police officer removed, and some judges will do that. And I've had that done in the mainland, but I've never had it done in Hawaii. But I also kind of make it a habit not to get pulled over and fight those battles anymore either.
Right, right.
Because more often than not, you don't win. And you got to decide which battles you want to fight. Now, if you have perfected your UCC documents, that might be valid. But then you get into the question, well, you tell me how you perfect them. I know 3 or 4 different ways that have been perfected according to some people, but I have not found any that are fail-proof. And mainly because, to a large degree, the one thing you cannot regulate is attitude. If I'm working with someone, and the first thing that comes out of their mouth, well, I'll try this, but I don't think it'll work, I'm done working with them.
Right.
Because I know that attitude goes a long way. So you can't cover that part of it. And but I always, when people say, well, I have my UCC, and I say, well, you know what? I don't have mine. And the reason I don't have mine, I have too many people that I know personally that have done it. They're in prison.
Right. Yep.
Now, partly because of how they did it, I think. But I'm not sure you even have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another place where I agree. I didn't do the UCC documents either for the same reason. But I just we're down to about 3 minutes and 15 seconds left in the program. And Ken, you mentioned earlier that you had some websites or maybe some material that you could suggest to people to educate themselves.
Yeah, what I'll do is this. The best thing to do is for them to write to me. I have my own company website, and that is called Your, Y-O-U-R, Peace, as in peace, not war. It's called yourpeaceofproperty.com. That's my company website. Email address, if anyone wants to have Vince's Kahn's 112-page handbook, which I think is a good starting point if you really want to know the truth about mortgages as I define it, they can write to me at krhunt, H-U-N-T, Hawaii @yahoo.com. And they can send me an email on my website as well. Just make note what you want. If you say you want the handbook, mortgage handbook, or mortgage defense handbook, or anything like that, I'll be glad to get back with them. If anyone's really interested in what I follow and the attorneys that I follow, they can make that request as well at either one of those websites. Because depending on what state they're in, there are some attorneys I can recommend if that's the way they want to go. But in my opinion, the best thing to do is to either learn the stuff for themselves and know that when they're in court, they have to be able to defend themselves and don't count on someone else. Or, yes, if they want to use our services, pay a fee currently, that's fine. They want to wait a little while and let us cover the costs and run it up the tree, that's fine too. That means we cover the expense of flying in and doing all those wonderful things that to a large degree they could do themselves if they felt like they could handle it. But the system survives because people are told they cannot have someone else defend them in a court of law, which is total bullshit. You can have a mouthpiece if you want. If we go back to the Greek way, which I think would be great, if you're going to not have yourself defending, or if you don't defend yourself in court, you can hire an attorney, but the attorney must be nude. I think that would be a fascinating way to change the justice system in America. You definitely would have a lot less boasting about how great thou art if you didn't have any clothes on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would probably open the eyes of the justice system. After all, they're blindfolded and holding two scales, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, Ken, I really appreciate I appreciate you coming on tonight, and it's been a great show. You've taught us a lot of things, and I'm just going to give you a final word. Anything that you'd like to say?
No, that's about it. Like I said, when we have in place where we can offer our services at no cost, we'll come back and tell you about those.
All right.
The main thing we want to do is for people to empower themselves, empower their community, take back their community, which allows them to take back their country. That simple. We are responsible for our own actions in life and where we are. No one else to blame but ourselves.
Thank you very much, Ken. And
thank you.
We appreciate you being on for Ken Hunt. This is Rick Hidalgo. This has been the House of Hidalgo show. Thank you, and God bless.
God bless you, too.